Good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Booker, and today I'll be giving the forecast for December the 15th. We got some really cold temperatures this morning across the U.S., anywhere from the Great Plains, really eastward into much of the mid-Atlantic and the southeast, extending up into Maine. Temperatures below freezing this morning in many areas, and two really cold pockets of air over the Ohio Valley, single digits this morning. Extending up into northern Minnesota. We got another really cold pocket of air over upstate New York, extending into portions of Maine. Now, this cold air will continue to stay over the region until Tuesday morning. This is before a ridge in the west moves east and brings us some much warmer weather as we head into the day Wednesday. But before then, let's kind of take a look at the 500 millibar setup this morning. And we can see this general flow northwest to southeast here, extending out of southern Canada. And this flow of energy is what's bringing in the colder temperatures here from Canada. And you can see this morning that we have this high pressure system over the Ohio Valley. And of course, we have this clockwise flow around high pressure at the surface. And this will eventually bring in those warmer temperatures as we get towards midweek. Now, looking at the forecast map for early this week, one of the things you'll notice right away is there's not a whole lot going on in much of the country, especially Monday through Wednesday. If you look at the Great Plains extending eastward through the southeast, mid-Atlantic, and even the northeast, not much precipitation is occurring. However, to the north and west over the states of Washington and Oregon, if you look closely, we have some very heavy rainfall moving onshore. This particular period that I'm showing here is during the day Tuesday into Wednesday, and you can see the very heavy rains and some mountain snow occurring in that region. Now, unfortunately for folks on the west coast, we have this west to east flow off the Pacific that's going to be maintained for probably the rest of the month of December. You can see how the 500 millibar heights show that, again, this west to east flow here. However, you can see this ridge positioned over the Intermountain West, and that's going to begin to propagate eastward with time. And as it does so, it will begin to break down. You'll see these shortwave troughs kind of push out of Canada southward into the Great Plains as we move forward in time. And one in particular here, this shortwave is going to move over the northeast during the day Wednesday and add a reinforcing shot of cold air to the northeast and set up a cold air damming event, a weak one at first, over the mid-Atlantic. And as we get later in the week, you can see this stronger trough move out of the Great Plains, and that's going to be associated with an Alberta Clipper that was once a part of an atmospheric river event that we see during the day Tuesday and Wednesday over the state of Washington. Now, what you're seeing here is the temperature map from Monday through Thursday morning. What you'll notice is that there's some cool temperatures hanging tough in the northeast throughout this period. In fact, we have morning lows in the 20s likely Tuesday over much of the southeast and mid-Atlantic. Temperatures continue to be in the teens over the northeast during that period of time. There is a brief warm-up in the Midwest associated with that ridge propagating to the east on the day Wednesday. However, you can see this shot of cold air that begins to move into the northern Great Plains, especially as we get into early Thursday morning. Again, this will add a reinforcing shot of cold air to the northeast and really not give folks in the northeast much of a chance to warm up at all. But we're seeing this trend of warm air rising up from the Gulf of Mexico and moisture with it as we get into the day Thursday. And this will bring a chance of showers and even a few thunderstorms along the Gulf Coast as this trough begins to dive out of the Great Plains later in the week. I do want to mention that we do have these warmer temperatures over the state of California, Arizona, and New Mexico as well, associated with this ridge. This region, of course, has been dry as well as warm for the last several weeks. However, in the northwest, it does look like we have temperatures cooling down, especially for that second atmospheric event that's moving in during Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. Now, the radar image that you're seeing here is a high-resolution image of what is forecast for Monday morning into Tuesday morning. And you can see that much of the rain will be heavy during the early part of the day Monday and actually become much lighter as we get late in the day. And there could be a break in the precipitation actually for the first part of Tuesday. One thing you'll notice too is that there's very little mountain snow associated with the first event. In fact, this looks to be a very warm system overall. Now, this is not the case for the second system that arrives Tuesday, let's say late in the afternoon, and continues early into Wednesday morning for the western coast of, let's say, Washington State and Oregon State. We can see heavier rains associated with the system, but also a changeover to snow. Snow levels dropping to maybe as low as 2,000 to 3,000 feet, and this will allow for 6 to 12 inches of snowfall accumulation to some of these passes, especially in the Cascades of the state of Washington. Now, what you're seeing now is the precipitation forecast for the region for Monday through Wednesday morning. We can see highlighted here the cities of Seattle and also Portland. And in general, these cities will be seeing anywhere between 1 to 2 inches of rainfall. The surrounding high regions, though, and the coastal range, as well as the Cascades, rainfall in general 2.5 to maybe as much as 5 or 6 inches of rain, especially as you increase in elevation. The next map here I want to show is the projected snowfall. You can see here that snowfall levels do drop as you head to the north and to the east in general. And over the Cascades, we can see that the highest amounts of snowfall associated with this colder air coming down from Canada is expected over the northern Cascades in Washington State. As much as a foot of snow or more could fall in this area of the state of Washington. Now, what you're seeing here as we get into the days Wednesday and Thursday is this developing Alberta Clipper associated with that second atmospheric river forming over Alberta, of course, and moving across southern Canada during the day Thursday. And with it, you can see this trough beginning to extend down into the central Great Plains. And in front of that, out ahead of it, we have this line of showers and probably thunderstorms as you move south towards the Gulf of Mexico. So some heavy rainfall can be expected over the Ohio and Tennessee valleys as we get into Thursday afternoon. Now, meanwhile, off to the north and west, unfortunately, there's another atmospheric river moving inland here. And it's especially heavy over the state of Oregon as we get into the day Thursday. So more heavy rain on the way for the coastal range and the Cascades as we head towards the end of the week. Okay, so what we're seeing here in this image is the convective available potential energy, or CAPE. And we can see that here with the green on the map. And what's harder to make out here is where exactly this is occurring. And where it's actually occurring here is in eastern Texas, much of Louisiana, and southern Mississippi. And again, this is lower values, not high enough really to produce severe weather, but there's enough instability here to create some thunderstorms Thursday afternoon. Now, as we get into the day Thursday, we're going to actually have this wedge or cold air damming event set up on the eastern side of the Appalachians. One thing that's happening ahead of the day Thursday is the shortwave moving in to the northeast. This is providing a reinforcing shot of cold air, at least briefly, to that part of the country. And then also we have this high pressure system off the Delmarva Peninsula. We can see two areas here of high pressure off the east coast. And what it's doing is it's providing for calm conditions at the surface east of the Appalachians. And on the western side, you can see this southerly flow that's setting up on the western side of the Appalachians. Now, there'll be a warm-up on that side. However, at the surface, there's going to be cooler air that's going to be filtering down to the south. So you'll notice a difference if you're driving from one side to the other of the Appalachians, especially in the mid-Atlantic region during the day Thursday. For instance, if you live in Asheville or Roanoke, temperatures in the 40s during the day Thursday. You drive westward into Kentucky or eastward even to, let's say, the eastern shore of Virginia, and you'll notice a warm-up in those temperatures. Now, I do want to mention that this warm-up will take place Thursday into Friday, especially over the Ohio Valley, and eventually into the Northeast. But it'll be a very brief warm-up because we have this trough that's actually moving from northwest to southeast out of Canada. And with it, we have that associated Alberta Clipper delivering snow to portions of the Great Lakes, but especially into southern Canada. Now, that shot of cold air, one thing you'll notice is that it's not going to have much staying power. We're looking at these cold air outbreaks maybe lasting 24 hours versus the 48 to 72 hours that we've been experiencing, let's say, in the early part of December. And I feel like that's going to be the case moving forward as we move, let's say, into the second half of December here, where cold air does take place in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic, but it won't be as cold and it won't last as long as we've seen earlier in the month. But one thing to take note of here is that the ridge does kind of maintain the same position, and it does fight its way to the east with time here, and it will provide reinforcing shots of warm air to the Central Plains, to the Mid-Atlantic, and eventually the Northeast over time. Now, looking at this map, anywhere where you see blue, that's temperatures below freezing, and those are moving down south and east with time into the Ohio Valley, eventually the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. One thing you'll notice is that it doesn't have as much staying power, right? We see these blues move down into Ohio Valley, delivering below freezing temperature, maybe for a single day. Same thing is true for the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, and then it scoots out. And this is going to be a very quick hitter here in comparison to what we're experiencing this morning and especially Tuesday morning across the U.S. But this will provide for reinforcing shots of cold air and help to keep the cold air in place over New England. I feel like people living in New England will experience the cold longer than anybody as we get into this weekend. Further to the west, you'll notice that temperatures begin to warm up very quickly, right? And it seems to be warmer this time than even before. Temperatures rising into the 60s and 70s, even into the state of Oklahoma. These temperatures will likely propagate east with time as we get into early next week. At the same time, we can see this second area of cold air moving out of Canada, right, and beginning to move south and east with time. That will probably be for the middle part of next week. As of now, we don't know how far south that will dive and how that will impact driving conditions as we move forward. So what you're seeing here is the forecast temperatures for Saturday afternoon at 1 p.m. And what you'll notice is that we have this wedge of cold air on the eastern side of the Appalachians. We'll be seeing temperatures in the 40s in places like Roanoke, Virginia, also Asheville, North Carolina. Whereas on the western side of the Appalachians, let's say as you get into Louisville, Kentucky, right? Nashville, Tennessee, places directly to the west of these locations that I just mentioned, they'll be experiencing temperatures in the middle 50s by comparison, so a full 10 degrees warmer, depending on what side of the mountain chain you actually end up on. Pointed out by this arrow here, we have another area of cold temperatures moving into the Central Plains. And that might arrive before the warm air actually propagates to the east. So locations in New York State, extending north and eastward into the state of Maine, you guys might stay cold for much of the weekend and even early next week as we have this reinforcing shot of cold air move into the United States. I do believe that we'll have this ridge stay over much of the Intermountain West and extend eastward into the Central Plains in the southeast and kind of hold steady over this region, providing warmer temperatures in general by comparison to what we saw earlier this month. But also we'll continue to see these shots of cold air move out of Canada at the same time. And after Thursday, really, we'll see that we have this clearing pattern set up over much of the United States. Again, high pressure kind of setting up over the east, but at the same time we have this atmospheric river move onshore in the state of Oregon and providing heavy rains to that state once again. Mountain snowfall over Idaho and Montana likely. And we could see these elevations for snowfall begin to drop as we get late in the weekend, especially as we get into the day Saturday over the Cascades. Again, snowfall levels dropping to around 2,500 feet again. So we could see some heavy snow pile up in that region as we get into next weekend. Elsewhere, we could see some snowfall over the Midwest and the Great Lakes, but it looks like it's going to be lighter this time as we get into the weekend. Nothing like what we saw last week, where we received, half a foot of snow in some locations. Won't be seeing that. We'll probably be seeing anywhere from 1 to 3 inches in general. Now, I do want to show rainfall amounts for this week. We can see the big winners over the Northwest, anywhere from 1 to 3 inches for, let's say, the cities of Portland and Seattle. And we could see some river flooding and small stream flooding in these particular areas. That's one thing we're seeing from the National Weather Service's warnings and watches going up in that region. Over the mountain passes, again, we're going to be seeing some high winds, 30 to 50 miles per hour, heavy rains, if not heavy snowfall, right as we get into the day Wednesday. Mountain passes, especially up in the state of Washington, snowfall levels dropping to around 2,500 feet, maybe as low as 2,000 feet. So if you're traveling over the state of Washington from Seattle eastward, you got to keep that in mind, right, as you're going over these mountain passes. Could run into 6 to 12 inches of snowfall. But in general, in these coastal ranges of Oregon and Washington state, extending eastward into the Cascades, we're seeing again 5 to 10 inches of rainfall accumulation here. And for those watching in Vancouver, Canada, same thing is true up there. We could see heavy rainfall to begin Monday, but again, mountain snowfall as you get into the day Wednesday. That could be expected. Rainfall and snowfall likely heavy as you get into the state of Idaho and also western Montana, especially near Glacier National Park. And as far eastward as, let's say, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, right, we could see upwards of 1 to 2 inches of rainfall equivalent, likely in the form of snowfall, though, in that region. And further east still, if we look over the Ohio Valley with that developing low-pressure system, right, with that Alberta Clipper, we could see anywhere from a half an inch to maybe an inch of rainfall over the Ohio Valley. And as that runs into the Appalachians, of course, that begins to fall apart. And we'll likely see more in line with maybe a tenth to a quarter an inch of rain as you get into the Carolinas and Virginia during the day Thursday into Friday. Now further north and east, we can see those accumulations pick up anywhere from a quarter to a half an inch in general in most locations. Again, near the Tug Hill Plateau, that's taken into account some lake effect that follows that front on Thursday. And elsewhere into Canada, for those that may be watching, we can see some heavier snowfall, let's say, into the province of Ontario. We can see anywhere from maybe 6 to 12 inches in parts of the province from that Alberta Clipper we were looking at previously. Now, one thing you can probably pick out here is this dry area over the southwest. And you can probably pick out also that ridge that's outlining much of the Intermountain West, extending eastward into the Mississippi Valley. And you can kind of imagine those systems overrunning, let's say, the northern edge of that ridge and losing much of that precipitation. And then as it gets further and further east, gets some of that Gulf of Mexico moisture and Atlantic moisture, and we can see some increase in rainfall as a result, east, especially east of the Mississippi River. But that will probably be the continuing trend for much of the month here of December. But one thing we're seeing is just the continued trend of drought here in the southwest, with little to no rainfall from Southern California into much of central and northern Texas. So one thing I wanted to do today to kind of wrap up things was end with a question. One of the things we talked about was the cold air wedge in the video, and we showed this on the eastern side of the Appalachians in an earlier frame of the video. Kind of just to remind you here, I have that picture to the bottom right. But my question for you is, does this only occur on the eastern side of the Appalachians? If not, where else can it occur? And I was curious if anybody knew the answer to that question. Does it just occur in the United States, or does it occur across the world in different locations? And I think that would open up a good discussion in the comments. Well, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. In the meantime, I hope you have a great week.